Will Smith could do no wrong. The Fresh Prince turned box office king. He was the symbol of charisma, confidence, and family values. From The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to Men in Black, from Grammy-winning rap albums to Oscar-nominated performances, Will Smith was the epitome of success. But behind that signature smile and swagger was a man carrying wounds the world never saw. And now at 56, the man who once embodied invincibility is unraveling before our eyes. What happened to Will Smith isn't just tragic, it's haunting. A slap at the Oscars became a symbol of a deeper collapse. The golden boy of Hollywood suddenly looked lost. Public humiliation, broken relationships, battles with mental health, a controversial marriage under constant scrutiny, and a public redemption arc that never quite landed. This isn't just about a fall from grace. It's about a man caught between fame and fragility. A man who gave the world everything and was left with almost nothing of himself. The tragedy of Will Smith is not in what he did, but in what he endured, quietly and for far too long. And when the mask finally slipped, the truth was more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Long before the world knew Will Smith as the suave action hero or rap superstar, he was just a kid from West Philadelphia with a secret, one he would carry for decades. Will wasn't just performing on stage or in front of the camera. He was performing in life, behind the laughter, behind the charm, behind the seemingly effortless confidence. There was a scared little boy who grew up in a house where violence was as routine as dinner. His father, Willard Carroll Smith Sr., was a strict disciplinarian, but more than that, he was abusive. Will has confessed in interviews and his autobiography that he saw his father hit his mother in a way that shattered something inside him forever. That moment shaped the very foundation of who he became. He made a decision. He would be funny, friendly, and flawless, the protector, the pleaser, the nice guy who would never allow anyone to feel the kind of pain he saw in his mother's eyes. But this survival strategy, built in childhood, became a prison in adulthood as Will rose to fame, first as a teenage rapper with DJ Jazzy Jeff, and then as the breakout star of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The world saw the joy but not the anxiety, the charm but not the fear. Will admitted he never drank, smoked, or cursed in his early career, not out of virtue, but out of fear of losing control. He needed to be perfect, to be accepted, to be invulnerable, and it worked for years. He became a household name, a blockbuster icon, a global celebrity. But perfection has a price, especially when it's a performance you can never stop. The cracks began to show slowly. The public didn't notice, but behind the scenes, Will was desperately trying to outrun the ghost of his childhood. Every hit movie, every award, every calculated interview was a move in a lifelong game of image management. His marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith, which was once seen as one of Hollywood's strongest unions, became its own battleground. Complicated, raw, and eventually exposed to the world in painful public ways.
Will built an empire on likability, but he was bleeding internally from the years of hiding who he really was. The mask began to slip when he published his memoir, a brutally honest confession of pain.
People-pleasing and personal failure. Fans were shocked. This wasn't the Will they knew. This was a man who, even in his highest moments, felt empty. He revealed he had suicidal thoughts as a teenager. He felt like a coward for not protecting his mother. He felt shame for failing as a husband and father. He called himself a coward, not because he lacked bravery on screen, but because he never confronted his own trauma off-screen. For the first time, the world began to see the weight behind the smile, and it was heartbreaking. For decades, Will Smith was the sun around which Hollywood revolved. Everything he touched turned to gold. Independence Day, Men in Black, Ali, The Pursuit of Happiness, I Am Legend. He was not just a movie star, he was the movie star. A bankable, family-friendly, multi-talented icon with an infectious laugh and universal appeal. But behind the red carpets and standing ovations, the truth was darker. The spotlight that made him a superstar was also slowly burning him alive. Every smile became forced. Every interview rehearsed. Every moment in public, another performance to hold up a crumbling persona. Because when you're at the top, there's nowhere to go but down. And Will Smith could feel the fall coming. The trouble wasn't just internal. It was also relational. His marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith had become a media circus. The couple's confessions on the Red Table Talk show peeled back layers of a relationship that was far from the fairy tale fans believed. They spoke candidly about their separation, open marriage, and personal struggles. But what stunned audiences was Will's expression. Distant, broken, trying to hold back tears. The memes flooded the internet. People laughed. But very few asked, what kind of pain lives in a man's eyes like that? In trying to be honest with the world, Will only opened himself up to more ridicule. And once social media got hold of the narrative, they didn't let go. He became the butt of jokes, a punchline, the guy who couldn't keep his wife, and it devastated him. Then came the moment that shattered everything. The Oscars slap. A single night that would define Will Smith, not for his decades of excellence, but for a brief, brutal loss of control. When Chris Rock made a joke about Jada's shaved head, a sensitive topic due to her alopecia, Will, in a move no one saw coming, walked up on stage and slapped him in front of the entire world. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. The internet erupted. And just like that, the man who spent a lifetime building an image of grace and control had obliterated it in seconds. But what most people missed in that moment wasn't rage. It was rupture. A crack in the emotional dam that had been holding back years of humiliation, frustration, and pain. If you've made it this far into Will's heartbreaking journey, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment below. Every interaction helps us bring you more powerful, untold stories from behind the celebrity spotlight. Back to the tragedy. After the Oscars, everything came crashing down. Public backlash was immediate and relentless. He resigned from the Academy. Projects were paused or cancelled. Friends distanced themselves. His public apology, though sincere, was seen by many as too late. But behind the scenes, Will wasn't just dealing with the professional fallout. He was confronting the deepest emotional reckoning of his life. In his own words, he wasn't angry at Chris Rock. He was angry at himself, at the world, at years of bottled-up pain. The Oscars slap wasn't about a joke. It was about a man who had been performing perfection for so long, he forgot what it meant to simply be human. In that split second, the mask finally shattered. And what was left underneath was a man begging to be understood, not excused. After the Oscars incident, the world demanded answers. They wanted accountability. They wanted shame. But what they didn't understand was that Will Smith had already been living under the weight of shame for most of his life. Long before he ever stepped onto a stage. Long before the cameras ever rolled. The perfection he projected wasn't arrogance. It was armor. It was the only way he knew how to survive. He once said, "I've always thought of myself as a coward. Not because he lacked physical courage, but because he never stood up to his father. Because he never allowed himself to be vulnerable. Because he built a life where everything had to look good, even when everything was falling apart." That's the price of perfection. It's not just exhausting, it's soul-destroying. Behind closed doors, Will's life was unraveling. His children, Jaden, Willow, and Trey, were growing into their own identities, sometimes publicly questioning their upbringing, the pressures of fame, and even their relationship with him. Willow once wrote him a letter asking him to let Tupac come back so her mother could be happy again. A devastating reflection of how deep the cracks in the family had become. Jaden moved out at just 15, trying to find his own path after being overwhelmed by the expectations of being a Smith. And Jada, strong, vocal and unapologetically herself, had become a lightning rod for criticism. While many blamed her for Will's public unraveling, the truth is more complicated. Their marriage was never traditional, and both made choices that blurred the lines between love, duty, and independence. But for Will, the public exposure of their personal life was humiliating. He felt like he had failed, not just as a husband, but as a protector. And then came the silence. After the slap, after the apologies, after the viral memes and think pieces, Will Smith went quiet. No interviews, no flashy appearances, no quick comeback. He retreated into therapy, into solitude, into the painful work of facing himself. He admitted in one of his rare post-Oscars statements that he was going through something deep. He talked about the difference between image and integrity and how, for most of his life, he had confused the two. The world wanted Will Smith the entertainer, but he needed to find Will Smith the man, broken, healing, real. And yet, even in the midst of collapse, there was something remarkable about how he began to rebuild. Not loudly, not with a press tour or a redemption arc, but quietly, with humility. He spoke about learning to forgive himself, to sit with his shame, to stop performing and start feeling. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't headline-worthy, but it was real. The man who once strutted across movie sets with unshakable confidence was now learning how to walk again, slowly, carefully, and without the need for applause. What made it all the more tragic was that this fall came at a time when Will should have been celebrating a career triumph. He had finally won the Academy Award for Best Actor, a moment most actors dream of. But instead of standing in victory, he stood in disgrace. The golden statue felt more like a tombstone, marking the death of the old Will Smith, the one who lived for approval and image. And maybe that's what makes his story so painful. Because the tragedy isn't just in the fall, it's in how long he had to pretend he wasn't falling. In the quiet that followed the chaos, Will Smith faced something he had avoided his entire life. Stillness. For a man who had been running from trauma, running towards success, and running to stay in the world's good graces, silence felt like suffocation. But it was in that silence that Will finally began to hear his own voice. Not the voice of the Fresh Prince. Not the blockbuster star, not the polished interviewee, but the boy from Philadelphia who had learned to be perfect to survive. And now that boy was exhausted. Stripped of public adoration, faced with broken trust, and burdened by decades of unspoken pain, Will was forced to ask himself, who am I when the world stops clapping? What emerged wasn't a man chasing redemption. It was a man accepting responsibility. His return to the public eye was quiet, measured, even somber. He apologized again, not just for the slap, but for the years of emotional detachment, the facade, the ways he tried to control everything and everyone around him. He said, hurt people, and acknowledged that he had been hurting for far too long. He began speaking about emotional intelligence, about masculine vulnerability, about trauma, topics rarely explored by someone of his stature in Hollywood. For once, Will wasn't trying to be liked. He was just trying to be honest, and honesty came at a cost. Some fans never came back. Some studios moved on. The roles slowed down. The brand partnerships grew cautious. The Oscar win, once a crowning achievement, felt like a whisper in the shadow of that infamous slap. But Will seemed unbothered. Maybe for the first time in his life he wasn't living for the applause. He started rebuilding relationships, not just with his audience, but with his family. He and Jada redefined their bond on their own terms, without needing the world's approval. He reconnected with his children, no longer trying to mold them, but to understand them. He spent more time off camera than on, reconnecting with himself, with his roots, with the humanity he had long buried beneath the persona of Will Smith. The tragedy of Will Smith isn't that he made a mistake. It's that he spent a lifetime trying so hard to avoid making one, he forgot what it meant to be human. And when that humanity finally broke through, raw, angry, vulnerable, it shocked the world. But perhaps it also set him free. Because while Hollywood is quick to judge, it rarely pauses to ask why. Why did the golden boy snap? Why did the king of clean-cut charisma lash out? Why did a man who had it all, fortune, family, fame, still feel empty? The answers aren't simple. Will Smith is not a villain. He is not a hero. He is a man, broken, healing, and still learning how to be whole. At 56, he carries the scars of a lifetime spent performing perfection. But he also carries something else now, awareness. And with awareness comes growth. It doesn't erase the pain or undo the mistakes, but it offers the only path forward, one that isn't paved with praise, but with purpose. In the end, Will Smith's story is not just a cautionary tale about fame. It's a universal reminder of how deeply we